Alright guys, so in the last video we went ahead and created our post route here. We made sure we have all of our validation, so the user has to enter the correct data when they make the request. Now we want to start to work on registering the user. Now there's a couple things we need to do. Let me just put some comments in here. So we're going to want to see if, I'm going to delete these after, but we want to see if the user exists. Just so you know what's going to go on here. We want to see if the user exists. If the user exists, we're going to send back an error because obviously a user can't, we don't want multiple emails. Then we want to get users gravatar, which is based on their email, and we want to put that, we want that to be part of the user that we're registering. Then we want to encrypt the password using bcrypt, and then we want to return the JSON web token. Now the reason I'm returning the JSON web token is because in the front end, when a user registers, I want them to get logged in right away, and in order to be logged in you have to have that token. So this is kind of the workflow that we're going to do here in this route. Alright, so let's start off with getting the user and seeing if they exist. Now remember, when we make a request and we send data, we can get it with request.body, we can get .name, .email, all that stuff. However, I don't want to keep having to do request.body, so I'm just going to destructure and I'm going to pull out a few things from request.body. So name, email, and password. Okay, so that will pull that stuff out. And before we can do anything, we need to bring in our model, our user model. So up here, let's just say actually I don't have to put a comment. It's pretty obvious. I'm going to try not to put too many comments just because I don't want to clutter things up. So let's do const user and set that to require. But if you need to put comments to kind of remind you what certain things do, then please do that. So we're going to go up 2 levels into models. Models, and then user. Alright, so we're going to be making a query with Mongoose. We can take our, I'm just typing this out, you don't have to type this, what I'm doing right now, but we're going to use find one, and that gives us a promise back. We could do like .then, .catch, but we're going to use async await. So in order to use async await, we have to label this function here as async. All right, and then down here we're going to use a try catch. Try catch, pass in an error. All right, and all this stuff that we're doing is actually going to happen within this try. All right, and I'll actually move this up here as well. Okay, now let me just tab that over. Now in the catch, so if something goes wrong, then it's just going to be a server error. Something's wrong with the server. So I'm going to first of all console error the error.message value, whatever that is, just so we can see that in the console. And then as far as the response, I'll do a status of 500, and let's just do a send, and we'll send the text server error. Alright, so that's the catch. So everything else is going to go within this try. So let's go ahead and check if the user exists. So I'll get rid of this. And let's grab the user. So I'm going to say let user. Now we're using async await, so I need to say await and then user dot find one. Find one takes in a field if we wanted to search by username or whatever. I want to search by email. And instead of doing this, because this variable is also called email, so I can just cut that out, and that will get the user. And we want to check to see if the user exists, so we'll say if user. Then what do we want to do? Now we want to send back a status of 400 because it's a bad request, and we're going to say .json. And what I'm going to do here is I want to match the same type of error response that we get up here from this body stuff, which is an array of errors. So this might look a little funny, but the reason I'm doing it is so on the client we get the same type of error, whether it's one of those input errors or the user is actually already there. So we'll put errors and set that to an array with an object with a message that says user already exists. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save that. All right, now down here in the console you can see this deprecation warning: ensure index is deprecated, use create indexes instead. So this is another one of those Mongoose errors where we're required to add an option to get rid of it. So inside of config db.js, we're going to go right where we did the use new URL parser, and we're going to say use create index and set that to true. So once I do that, it'll get rid of that silly warning. All right, so now here, this is going to run, or this, whatever we put here will run if the user is not found. And we want to get the user's Gravatar. So in order to do that, we're going to bring in the Gravatar package that we installed in the beginning. So we want to require that. Let me just make sure I did install that. Yeah, right here. So if you don't have this in your package JSON and you didn't install it, just do npm install Gravatar. All right, now this is pretty easy to use. We basically just need to pass the user's email into a method, and that will get us the URL of the Gravatar. So let's do const avatar and set that to gravatar.email. I'm sorry, not email, URL. And then we pass in the email, and then I'm going to pass in some options. So there's three options I'm going to pass in. One is S, which is the size, default size, which I'm going to set to, it's actually a string of 200. And then the rating, so R will be the rating. I'm going to set that to PG, so basically we can't have any naked people or anything. And then the default, so D, which I'm going to set to MM. I forget exactly what MM stands for, but it gives you like a default image, which is like a user icon. You could do 404, which would give you a file not found error, but we want to have something there even if the user doesn't have a Gravatar. So we want to use that as a default. All right, so once we do that, we want to create an instance of a user. So I'm actually going to take that user variable we created right here and set that to new user. All right, and then we'll pass in an object with the fields that we want, which is the name, email, avatar, and password. Now, this password is not hashed or not encrypted yet, so we need to do that. And this doesn't save the user, by the way. It just creates a new instance. We have to call user.save in order to actually save it to the database. So before we do that, we want to encrypt the password using bcrypt. So let's go ahead and bring in bcrypt. So we're going to say bcrypt require, and we're using bcrypt.js. So it's important to add the JS. All right, and then down here, so first thing we need to do before we encrypt it is we need to create a salt to do the hashing with. So we're going to create a variable called salt, and this we can get a promise from bcrypt.gensalt. So we want to use await here, and then bcrypt.gensalt, and then we pass in what are called the rounds, and we're going to use 10, which is what's recommended in the documentation. The more you have, the more secure, but the slower it can be. So we're just going to use 10 here. So that creates the salt. Now we want to take this password and hash it. So let's say user, which is this object right here, take the password and set it to await bcrypt dot hash, and this takes in two things. It takes in the plain text password, which is going to be password, and then the salt. Okay, and it creates a hash, and it will put that into this user password. All right, so the user still hasn't been saved to the database. The way that we do that is with user.save. Now this gives us a promise, so again, .then, but we're using a sync await, so we're just going to add await here. Okay, anything that returns a promise, you want to make sure you put await in front of. If we didn't use a sync await here, we would have to do .then here, and then inside the .then we do bcrypt hash .then, and it just looks very messy. I think this looks just very elegant, and you can clearly see what's going on. All right, so that will actually save the user. Now, as far as the return, I want to return the JSON web token as I have here, but I'm not going to do that in this video. I just want to make sure that we can actually register a user. So for now, we'll just do a send, and we'll say user registered, and we'll be able to check from within MongoDB Atlas. So let's save this and let's try it out. So we'll go to Postman, and I'm just going to leave the data I already have in here. I'm going to go ahead and click send, and we get user registered. So we don't really know if it's registered yet. Something could have went wrong. I could have messed something up. So let's go to our database and go to collections. And you can see that we have a collection called users, and we have an underscore ID, which is an object ID. This is inserted automatically from MongoDB. We have a name, we have the email, we have the password that's hashed, we have the avatar, which is from gravatar.com, because the email address I used has an associated image or profile image with it. And GitHub uses Gravatar, by the way, if you're not familiar with that. And then we have the date. Okay, and if we want to see this image, yeah, let's just grab that. Let's see if that shows up. And there we go. There's a handsome fella. So that's what's going to be used as my Gravatar. Now, if it doesn't exist, let me just throw some characters in here. We should get that. So if the user doesn't have an image associated with their account, then that will show up in like posts and stuff on their profile. All right, so we're going to do the JWT stuff in the next video, but I just want to make sure we can't register the same user again. So I have all the same data here in Postman, and I'm going to send, and we get back an object with an errors array with a message of user already exists. So as you can see, the format of this error response is the same as if I go ahead and I leave out the name. Okay, we don't have the location in param, but that's fine. We're not even going to use this anyways. We just want the message. All right, so that's why I formatted it in that way, so that we get that same type of response. Now, one thing I noticed was this error in the console here. Basically it's saying that headers were already sent, and that's because we have this res.status 400 right here if a user was found, and then we have our final res.send down here. So if we're going to do that, we actually have to add a return to this one, okay, just as we did right here. So if I save that, we shouldn't get that error anymore. So if we just make a request and go back, now we don't get that error. So make sure you add that return if it's not the very last res.json or res.status. All right, so that's it, guys. In the next video, we're going to start to work on sending back the JSON web token once the user's registered.